Hello, today is August 27, 2019, and welcome to another Progressives for Immigration Reform podcast. I am your host, Kevin Lynn, and I am the Executive Director of Progressives for Immigration Reform. And today, I have the special privilege to be joined by someone who is not a stranger to those who read our columns and watch our podcasts, Leon Kolankiewicz. Leon, welcome to our podcast.
Many thanks, Kevin.
Well, Leon, you are an environmental scientist and you are a wildlife biologist. And I'm glad you're here today because I want to talk to you about a column you just posted, and it's entitled, "What is the greatest threat to endangered species? Hint, it's not Trump's new rules." Now, that's not to say, reading the column, that you're not very critical of what Trump is planning to do to the Endangered Species Act. But before we delve into your hint, let's talk, Leon, about what it is that Trump is trying to do, because he claims that he's trying to modernize and improve the Endangered Species Act, which has been on the books since 1973.
Correct, right. Whenever someone is using language like that is invariably positive language, that they may be actually, in fact, changing something in a way that isn't an improvement.
Maybe there's some nefarious, something very nefarious about what their intentions might be nefarious.
Right. So. Very generic positive terms to improve or to modernize something. Who can be opposed to those, right? And yet environmentalists, in that it's coming from the Trump administration, have found a way to get up in arms about this, understandably. As I understand it, there are three major changes that the Trump administration is not just proposing here, but going to be implementing. They already proposed them, and this is a final rule that I think is supposed to be implemented next month. And what it calls for, the three main changes to the act, or improvements, quote unquote, are changes in the way that critical habitat is designated for these listed species. And by listed, I mean threatened and or endangered. There are two categories within the Endangered Species Act. Would be changes to so-called Section 7 consultation between other federal agencies that are proposing or funding projects and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, under whose jurisdiction implementing the Endangered Species Act, or ESA, falls. So there would be an effort to, quote unquote, streamline Section 7 consultation. And then a third one is a way in which threatened species would be treated vis-a-vis endangered species, both of which are covered by the Act.
Let's talk about going from the last one starting. Right. So the treating a threatened species different from an endangered species, what are the landmines there? What should we be concerned about?
Well, first of all, to distinguish between the two, an endangered species is one that is in imminent danger of actually going extinct. And endangered species can apply also to populations, distinct populations or subspecies. A given salmon run in the Columbia River, for example, or the Sacramento River can be listed as a population under the Endangered Species Act as either threatened or as endangered. So the ones that are endangered are in imminent danger of disappearing for all time from the face of the earth, forever, right? And those that are threatened, by contrast, may become endangered in the near future. That is, there tend to be more of them, or in a wider number of places, they aren't on the brink of extinction, as it were. And so the proposed changes would change the fact that right now, under the Endangered Species Act, both threatened and endangered species are given equal protection, equal measures to try and bring them back from near the brink or at the brink to allow their populations to recover and to be able to, quote unquote, delist them, as has happened, for example, with the bald eagle. The bald eagle was once threatened, our nation's symbol, and it has come back so well in the last 30 or 40 years since it was listed, I believe, as a threatened species, that it's been delisted, taken off the list altogether. So that is the overall goal of the ESA, is to bring back both threatened and endangered species from that brink or near brink of extinction.
And you would have to think that if a threatened species is given the same protection as endangered, right, let's just say you're a developer, or you're running a mining consortium, and there's a grosshawk that's threatened.
Right.
Knowing that having equal protection, you're going to be much more inclined to work with wildlife biologists like yourself, who might be tasked with ensuring the livelihood of let's say that animal, that species.
And so taking those, let me get the numbers here. There are right now 1,275 endangered species of plants and animals, and 388 threatened. So there are actually about 4 or 5 times as many endangered. But the 388 that are threatened are treated the same way. That is, they're protected to the same standards, and the effort is to try and recognize that they're not quite in the same place, right? So we needn't tie the hands of developers as much on the threatened as we do for the endangered. That's one of these proposed changes.
And now the Section 7, how they want the consultation process between different agencies to be quote unquote streamlined. Right. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've actually worked a lot with Section 7, and it's when a given agency, for example, the Army Corps of Engineers, is permitting a dam and reservoir, so-called fill in waters of the United States, and they or consultants will do studies on what species that are listed as threatened or endangered may be affected by this project, and then they have to do something called a biological assessment, which the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will look at and then consult with the Corps of Engineers and other stakeholders and the project proponent, other interested parties, to see what measures can be taken to protect those species in the event that this project is approved, right? And so by streamlining it, you may be reducing some of the scrutiny that the project itself is subjected to, or may cut down on the mitigation measures that are designed to improve the situation for that listed species. And so I think it's a legitimate source of concern, this effort to quote unquote streamline it and perhaps put limits on the extent to which the Fish and Wildlife Service can cooperate with proponent or lead agencies to allow projects to take place, but at the same time protect those species that may be impacted by those projects.
Interesting. And then we have the designation of critical habitat.
Yeah, that is something, you know, an endangered or a listed species, or indeed non-listed species, have to live somewhere, right? And the habitat for a given animal or plant is the environment that is suitable for it to live in. And so critical habitat is that which is deemed crucial or indispensable.
So if you were to cut down a forest that an endangered species or a threatened species is in,
it needs that forest.
You would in fact destroy that species.
Exactly. It's an indirect way of eliminating it. If if you took let's say the Earth, put in the most basic terms here, that Earth is habitat for human beings, and you stuck us on the moon, we wouldn't survive very long, right? We need the particular conditions that our critical habitat, i.e. the biosphere on this Earth, provides us. Same thing for other critters, right? They need a particular tidal range, or they need a particular type of forest, or a slope on that forest, or a particular, for mussels in certain streams, you need clean water, you need flowing water, not water sitting in a reservoir filled with silt, that sort of thing. So every living organism on Earth, grouped into species, has particular conditions that it needs to survive: food sources, energy sources, space, water, air types, and so forth. And so the critical habitat designation and the proposed changes to it are that this revision or quote unquote improvement would force the Fish and Wildlife Service to focus only on those critical habitats where the animal exists already, or where the endangered species lists already, not those that are deemed that it could be suitable habitat for it, but where they've been wiped out. Right. So you can't designate areas where they don't already occur, right?
Oh my gosh, so if there's no opportunity then to, as we bring this population, recover the population,
allow it to expand into others. It may do that on its own through the other measures and efforts that are being made to help it, but there wouldn't be an effort to protect that habitat to which it might move in, right? If protecting it means limiting developments in those habitats.
Wow, that would be...
that's potentially a major one.
That is. which kind of brings us to
Full circle.
right, as bad as these modifications to the Endangered Species Act might be, from your point of view, Leon, this isn't the most critical harm that it could be done to endangered and threatened species here. There's other things that are ongoing outside of the ESA that you feel we need to talk about.
Well, we need to look at why over 1,600 species of plants and animals are in the Endangered Species Act right now, and the major threats or stressors to which those species are faced, which is why they're declining or have declined for decades or centuries and are in danger of disappearing for all time from the face of the earth, are several. And the main one is loss of habitat, typically called habitat loss, habitat destruction, or habitat fragmentation or degradation. That is the primary reason why in the United States and around the world that species, all species, even those not yet listed, are in decline right now, and major decline, and it's a global phenomenon that is just unprecedented since really 65 million years ago at the time an asteroid or part of a comet slammed into the earth and caused the demise of the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. So we're talking about another major extinction event on the face of the earth, this one entirely as a result of the actions of one species in particular, our own Homo sapiens. And the reason, supposedly Homo sapiens, right? Thinking. The sapiens part is supposedly thinking, and
or not thinking.
We aren't very thoughtful in a lot of instances.
So it's human. It's human sprawl. It's the growth of human populations.
We are causing this habitat change, right? And a study recently done by a group of scientists from 2001 to 2017, over a 16-year period, indicated that something like 24 million acres, additional acres, in addition to everything that had been lost before that, but in that 16-year period, 24 million acres were lost of natural lands, natural habitats in the United States over that 16-year period. That's the equivalent of 10 of one of our largest national parks, Yellowstone, the very first national park in the world. It's the equivalent of nearly 50 Great Smoky Mountains national parks here in the eastern United States. And that's an example of the sheer scale of this habitat loss in our one country over a very short period of time. Habitat loss, damage, fragmentation, degradation far exceeds any other causes of the decline of all species, and especially those that are listed as threatened or endangered. More than pollution, more than contamination, more than invasive species which compete with them, more than climate change right now, although climate change can lead to habitat loss and shifts. So the same study that I cited, Kevin, listed 4 major stressors. One of them is urban lands or urbanization, agriculture, energy, and transportation. That is roads, right? Proliferating roads, proliferating farmland, or the need to be farming or ranching on such large areas. And if you think about it, human population, the number of us there are in this country, because each of us consumes resources, right? Human population exacerbates all 4 of these stressors on the loss and degradation of natural lands and natural habitat.
Absolutely, and that's looking at the big picture. Now, what I loved about your column, you brought it down to the scale of the individual, and I'll read that paragraph. You state, each added person, each new American consumer, whether native-born or foreign-born, is on average responsible for the loss of about half an acre of natural habitat or farmland. These lands are developed to meet our ever-rising demands for housing, transportation, commercial and office space, warehouses, factories, and manufacturing, utilities, educational and government facilities, and so forth.
Right.
So that's down, so we're all responsible.
Right. Individuals vary, but on the average, of course, the more people you add, the more land we take up, right? It's not rocket science.
Yeah, and last month here, where our office is located, I belong to a group that is a watchdog group and works to protect farmland.
Right.
And we lost at a township level. So essentially, 68 acres of very prime farmland is going to be developed, and it will. They're going to put 551 homes into that.
Wow.
It's a massive footprint. And when we say why, where's the growth? Well, there's going to be more people moving here. More people. We got to manage the growth.
Right.
We should be thinking about living more densely. We should be looking at infill, but it's much more economic to go to land that is already flat and
Right.
open and develop
The best
that.
farmland.
Yes.
Yeah, the deepest, best soils.
Yeah. Which we're going to need to feed our ever-growing
That's
population.
the irony. The larger population needs more food at the same time that is stripping away the ability to produce more food, and only increases in agricultural output, right? Productivity allow us to keep on going, but one wonders how much longer that can go on.
Right.
Having to run faster and faster on the treadmill just to stay in the same place. So the article that I just wrote for PFIR points out that between 1990 and 2100, a 20-year period, the U.S. population grew by about 60 million, which is about 30 million per decade, an incredible rate of increase that if you project it into the future, just keeps on going and going and going with no end in sight. There are about 330 million of us right now, which is approximately 130 million more than at the time of the first Earth Day in 1970, where everyone was concerned about overpopulation, and yet we've added 130 million people with massive impacts on our land base, habitat, endangered species, CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, exacerbating climate change, etc. So right now we see no end in sight to that.
Right, because we don't seem to be open to arguments of conservation.
Right.
We live in a world where I call them the powers that be. Right. They need consumers more consumers mean more corporate profits.
Right.
Right. And unfortunately, we could be much more effective in sustaining our way of life, sustaining our environment, making sure that species don't go in extinction if we would just learn to get by with less. And
Right.
the first
And to
step you
accept
would
limits.
think, exactly, accept limits, knowing that, wow, maybe there are limits to population.
Right.
And we don't seem to want to address that. And to me, that's the great tragedy.
Well, way back, again, about the time of the first Earth Day in 1972, there was a commission set up by President Nixon called the Commission on Population Growth in the American Future, chaired by Nelson D. Rockefeller, I believe, of the great Rockefeller clan. And it was a bipartisan commission, and it concluded in 1972. So we're talking nearly half a century ago now, that the U.S. would be well served to stabilize its population voluntarily. Stabilize doesn't mean constant rate of growth. It means stopping growth, right, at a certain level. And yet again, since that time, we've added 130 million. I think that's a 40% increase. Back then, environmentalists were concerned about it, and now they won't touch the issue with a 10-foot pole.
Right, because folks like us that have advocated for restricting immigration,
Right.
not because, I'm the son of an immigrant, not that I want to restrict immigration, but 80% of our population growth is directly attributed to immigrants and the children of immigrants.
In the future, it's going to be even higher, on the order of 90%.
Right.
So
and I think there's some states like California where it's 100%.
It's over 100% because of the massive out-migration.
Correct.
That is, the cost of living, the quality of life has declined. Something like 10 million people have moved out of California in the last 20 to 30 years, yet the population has kept on growing.
And it's not that, and it's funny because
you and I both used to live there, by the way.
Yes, exactly. So we both know what it was like and what it's like now. In a way, we're kind of refugees from some of the best climate in the world. So, wow. Leon, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me and our viewers. Everyone's a big fan of your work here at Progressives for Immigration Reform. And to our audience, I want to thank you again for joining us. If you liked this podcast, be sure to give us a thumbs up. And if you didn't like it, hey, give us a thumbs down. It all helps with the algorithm. And, and also be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you're kept abreast of all of our latest podcasts. And be sure to go to our webpage, Progressives for Immigration Reform, and in Contact, click on that and be sure to sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. Have a great day.